Welcome back to Stranded in Pittsburgh. Nick and Ethan back at it once again. Nate could not join us tonight due to a commitment with his job, so it's just us. Unlike Ethan, who last week ditched us for a concert for Mr. Morgan Wallen. But hopefully you had fun. I'm not going to give you the pleasure of answering because I'm still a little mad at you. But I'm here to forgive and forget, Ethan. How are you doing here?
I'm doing well. Football's back. Can't wait to talk about the Steelers and all of what that entails for a very exciting Week 1 matchup for the Steelers heading into their hopeful start to the regular season. A lot of hype going into it, so can't wait to talk about that and what that all entails for the Steelers heading into Week 1 against the 49ers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this Steelers team is a team that heading into the season, as you kind of alluded to there, you don't really know what you're going to get. You know, are they going to be below expectations? Are they going to be above expectations? And that kind of sounds really cookie cutter. Like any team could be above or below expectations. What are you talking about? But what I'm trying to get at here is you really don't know. Is this team going to make a push for the playoffs, or is this team in a very competitive AFC North not even going to finish 500? You really don't know. And this game against San Francisco is going to show a lot here in Week 1. And I think, there is a little more hype because it's a home opener Week 1, and they haven't had their home opener in Week 1 in a few years, what feels like a very long time. I can't remember the exact number of years, but it's definitely been a handful at least.
Like nine.
Yeah, 9 around there.
9
maybe
years,
that decade comment was a little long.
Yeah.
This has been a long time coming. There's a lot of hype. You have a team who made it very far in the playoffs in the 49ers, and there's a lot of great storylines to grab onto. And it's interesting to see. This is going to set the tone, I think, for how this Steelers season goes. And the preseason went so well that I think those expectations went from fringe playoff team to, hey, maybe we can win this division, which, again, is where things, as I was mentioning earlier, get a little shaky. How high are the expectations? How far will this team need to go to break people's spirit? Who knows? But we'll see what happens. Starting this Sunday, 17-game slate gets underway on Sunday on Fox from Acrisure Stadium, not Heinz Field, which pains me to say, but as a professional, we have to say Acrisure Stadium. So my apologies. But Ethan, we talked about leading into the show some storylines we were going to be focusing on. We all brought a few to the table. Would have loved to know what Nate had. Unfortunately, though, maybe one of us will have to telepathically think of what he would have said. But I'll let you start off. What's the first storyline you're really looking forward to in this game? And wait a minute.
Hey, there's
out
Nate.
of nowhere,
there we go.
in the
Wow.
middle of, right after we were about to get in, Nate Breisinger joins the show, did the little Undertaker sit up out of the coffin. Nate, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, sorry for running a little bit late, but I couldn't pull an Ethan like we had last week.
That's why we love you. I feel bad to tell you that I can't make it to your tailgate live on this show now after you just saved our show. But it is what it is. We're starting with the Steelers storylines we all wrote out. Ethan's about to tell us his first one. So, Ethan, after a little more anticipation now, why don't you deliver?
I think instead of the big elephant in the room with what happened in the preseason, I think the big storyline heading into this one is a little bit off-center, but I think Dan Moore Jr., how is he going to look in Week 1, especially going up against Nick Bosa? I think that's one of the big storylines heading into this one is how will Dan Moore Jr. how will we see his improvement coming into Week 1 of the season? Obviously, the big question was, will Dan Moore Jr. Will we see that improvement from him heading into Week 1 of the season, and how will he respond, especially with Broderick Jones behind him on the depth chart? It's going to be interesting to see how he responds to really two of the more prominent pass rushers in the NFL in the first 2 weeks of the season. How will we see him show off what he has been doing during camp and in the preseason? How will we see him kind of take that next step in his game heading into Week 1 of the season? I think that's one of the bigger storylines for this Steelers offensive line, especially after what we've seen over these past 2 seasons where this offensive line really hasn't been that top tier of an offensive line like we've seen back in the day over the past 5 years or so when we had that really strong, how the Steelers had that strong offensive line when Le'Veon Bell was the running back for the Steelers. It's kind of taken a step back, but how will this offensive line really improve? And that really starts with Dan Moore Jr. In that guard position.
Yeah, I think the offensive line is going to be something that we focus on all season. We saw some late off. I don't even think you could say off season because they happened once preseason began. But we saw them moving the likes of Kevin Dotson and others, and just a lot of movement on the offensive line from what we saw last year. And as you mentioned, Broderick Jones, there's so many guys you're going to keep an eye out here as we try to see if the Steelers can protect their not rookie any longer quarterback, but second-year quarterback Kenny Pickett here. Can they get him time to find those guys downfield, go past his first read, not make him go on the move? I heard someone today on the Ringer NFL show say that Kenny Pickett thinks that he is Josh Allen, but he's not. He tries to play like Josh Allen, but it isn't as good. I'm not saying Kenny Pickett's going to be as good as Josh Allen because that's asinine, although Josh Allen can get a little careless. But I think what I will say, and hopefully this doesn't get misconstrued by our thousands of haters, I do think Kenny Pickett's style could be very similar to Josh Allen if he gets to actually capitalize on those opportunities, run around, use his legs, as we all saw the fake slide in the ACC championship game. You know, Kenny likes to run around, he likes to improvise, he likes to make things happen. As a rookie on a team who was a 500 ball club last year, we didn't see much of that. But, you know, a good offensive line, that gives him a lot more opportunity to move around, have some time, go through his progressions, and, you know, see what he can do with the play, get a little more of his IQ of the game, see what he can do with the ball in his hands. And that all starts with an offensive line, I guess, is the long-winded way of getting that point across.
And to add to that, I mean, you know, making that comparison to Josh Allen, think about the physicality that Pickett brings to the aggressiveness. I mean, there was plays last year where he would fight for those yards. I mean, there was plays where he was mixing it up with, who was that, the Bills? And, you know, I think, you know, him being compared to Allen isn't too far off in terms of, like, the leadership he brings to the Steelers, too. So I think that's pretty big. And, you know, one of my storylines, just adding to that, was the fact, you know, we all talked about it, the offensive line. How do they do in this first week against the Niners? So.
Yeah, and I'll get into one of my storylines because it also falls in with the offense. This is something we touched about, I believe, a few weeks ago, maybe the last episode before my wedding. Or maybe we didn't talk about it at all. It was the first canceled episode because of Ethan. We're still not bitter about it. But Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. We keep hearing, allegedly, from inside the Steelers camp that Najee's job isn't in danger. He's their guy. I don't know. I think I want to believe it. I've kind of downplayed it myself, but I'm interested to see what actually happens here because Jaylen Warren has proven to be a very, very reliable second back. He's had some really good flashes this preseason, including that very long touchdown run. Let's see what happens with these two guys. Anthony McFarland's on the team, too. If you remember way back to his rookie year, how much I love me some Anthony McFarland. Ethan, I can't believe you're not laughing yet. But I'm really, really intrigued to see what the split between Najee and Jaylen Warren is.
I think instead of looking at it as a number one back, number two back, I think you really need to start looking at this 1-2 punch. We saw it with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt in Cleveland for those couple of years that they were together. I think it's more looking at they both have different skill sets that they bring to the table. Jaylen Warren's more of a speedy guy that will hit the hole right away. Najee Harris is more of a patient running back. I think people are looking at this more of who's going to take that number one spot, who's going to take that number two spot. The Steelers have something special here in these two guys. They both have different skill sets. They both bring different assets to the table that make them reliable, you know, options at the running back position in the NFL. So why not have these guys have that 1-2 punch type of capability? And I think you're going to see that. They're not going to rely on one guy more than the other. I think they're going to use these guys in the most opportune time possible. I don't think you're going to see a number one back, number two back. You're not going to see that bell cow running back style that the Steelers had with, you know, Le'Veon Bell, James Conner, those type of guys. I think you're going to see more of a split of when can we use these guys that will maximize their potential at the most opportune time in the game. And I think you're going to see that a lot this season because the Steelers have something special at the running back position. And not even just Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. You also see it with Anthony McFarland as well, how he's been able to rise to the occasion and really show that he has some potential as a key role player in NFL offense, especially throughout this preseason. We didn't see it in those first couple of years, but really now you see him kind of starting to take those couple of steps to where you can see him as a reliable option in an offense. So that running back position, instead of relying on that one guy, I think you're going to see the workload really spread out, and I think that's something the Steelers can really benefit off of heading into the season.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice if we shared our storylines, because I think we all have the same storylines, because mine's also looking at Harris and Warren and, in terms of how much carries they're going to get, because I think that dual threat running back system they could run with could be huge, because I know they really have overworked Harris the past few years. I mean, he eclipsed 1,000 yards last year, but I think Warren, that downhill speed that he has, once he hits the hole, very huge. We saw it in preseason, and I think that could be helpful. And I think with the offensive line also being better this year and the tight end blocking for the Steelers, I mean, both running backs could be very impactful, and I'm hoping that's what they do, because I think, Harris is a good running back, but I think just the overuse and overwork of him, I mean, who knows how many more years you can get out of him if you just overwork him. I mean, he's a very good back, but we haven't seen the big explosive home run touchdowns from him, so maybe that's what you see from Warren.
Yeah, I agree, Nate. Sorry about us stealing all of your storylines, but I tried to set it up there. I tried to bait it as the who's the RB1 to get a little debate spark there, but I agree with Ethan in saying we should just be thankful that this team has two backs that seem to be hungry and seem to really want to get after it. And then to leech off what Nate said, I'd love to see Najee have more of those explosive plays. And if Jalen Warren's capable of those too, hopefully he shows flashes of that in the regular season here as well. And Nate, if you have any storylines left that we didn't steal yet, please feel free. Oh, this doesn't look good.
No, those were the two I had. O-line, running backs. Basically, to that point, I mean, the only other thing to touch on the O-line, I mean, with Nick Bosa being there and the biggest contract ever handed out to an edge rusher, I mean, that's pretty big. And I know that 49ers defensive front's going to be pretty hard to handle for the Steelers O-line.
Be a good test. Ethan, what's your second storyline?
It's a pretty obvious one from what we've seen in the preseason, but how will this offense come out against the 49ers defense? We've seen this all preseason long, the Steelers offense. We've seen this Matt Canada offense. What will this team bring? We saw it in the preseason. There was a lot of firepower. There was a lot of big plays from the Steeler offense. How will we see this team react to games that actually matter? How will we see this team respond? How will we see Kenny Pickett in year two? It's all about the offense right now. The defense, I feel like they've added enough pieces to where you think that they're going to be a solid group. They have a lot of young guys. They drafted well on that front. They got Joey Porter Jr. They added some guys in free agency that really have beefed up that defense. But it's the offense. A lot of people were down on Matt Canada last year. How will we see him kind of grow and develop with Kenny Pickett under center for his second year? The offense was firing on all cylinders in the preseason. How will we see this offense react and respond to a very, very strong defense in week one and some very strong defenses in the first few weeks of the season? It's going to be crucial for this Steelers offense to really pick up on what they learned in those weeks during the preseason against the Bills, against the Buccaneers, against the Falcons. Yes, a lot of the teams that they played in the preseason weren't playing their starters, but how will the Steelers offense continue to grow from where they were in the preseason? I think that's going to be very interesting to see. Will we see the Steelers offense of old over these past two seasons where they've looked stagnant, or will we see them take more risk like they did in the preseason and really show what they are capable of? They have a really very solid wide receiving room. They have a solid receiving core with the tight ends as well. They've added some pieces there, and once again, like we've mentioned before, that offensive line has been bolstered up even more. How will we see this team take the next steps into being the team that we've seen that a lot of analysts have been saying this is the dark horse team? Will we see this in week one? I don't know. I don't know how to think about this team so far because we've seen it in the preseason. I don't like looking too far into the preseason and how the team has played. but it's something to be wary of because it's like this team has shown a lot during the preseason. How can we see it translate into the regular season play as well?
And I like that last point you kind of bring up there. This is a very good 49ers team that we're seeing them open the season with. And as me and Nate talked about last week, the Steelers towards the end of last season probably would have beaten the brakes off the Steelers at the beginning of last season. And so now they're starting the season against a team who was a juggernaut last year, made a run into the playoffs, as I mentioned earlier, with a guy named Brock Purdy, who most people probably didn't know going into last year. And then he became the savior of the team, guiding them through these tough playoff matchups. They're starting off against a team like that this year. What can they find right from the beginning with guys that are returning now rather than, a hodgepodge of nothingness, as the Pirates have been described in the past? These guys have been here. It ain't their first rodeo now. Now that chemistry's there a little more. They've had probably half of last season. They've had this preseason. What can these guys do right out of the gate this year? Can they start strong, capitalize on that strong finish from last year? And a lot of that's going to fall on the offense, as you mentioned, Ethan. I love the receiving room. We've already talked highly of the running backs. Now it's up to Kenny Pickett and Matt Canada to see what they can cook up together. I need them to kind of be like my boy Gordon Bombay and Charlie Conway in the Mighty Ducks movies. They got to come up with something. They got to start cooking, and they got to start cooking early, Ethan, because people aren't going to wait for the oven to preheat. They got to get right into it right away. Start a fire. Billy Joel didn't start the fire, but Matt Canada should. I tried to be quotable so many times there, and it probably sounded like a bunch of nothing. Bryce, give me your thoughts.
No, to carry that point, I think there's a really good chance that the Steelers start off really hot, but you got to worry that later on in the season they might cool down, kind of the opposite of what we saw last year. But I think just this team, there's going to be some points where there's going to be a little bit of growing pains with, the O-line and some other positions. But this is a team that I think has some swagger to them that we haven't seen for the past 2-3 years. And I think that's led by Kenny Pickett and George Pickens, and those are going to be your big playmakers this year. And I think we're going to see some guys who maybe, have a little bit of a resurgence, like, hopefully Deontay Johnson can step up and be the nice platoon receiver with George Pickens. So I think this team could start very hot and, be a team to look out for early.
Again, my boy Allen Robinson. Look out for him too. Calvin Austin. Someone's going to get upset they're not getting enough touches. Just kidding. You don't want to assume the worst right away. I know it's hard for Pittsburgh people not to do that. My last storyline, we kind of touched on it a bit during Ethan's explanation, but what's this defense going to offer? This is a very offense-centric league. Lots of high scores, lots of, really good playmakers, and obviously that's going to happen no matter what. But the Steelers have invested heavily in this defense. It was the case last year. They made some aggressive plays this offseason, bringing in veterans, Desmond King, Patrick Peterson, others. What's this defense going to be good for? Are they going to hit their marks? Because the offense, I feel like they're young. Some people might have them with a little bit of a longer leash. Now, granted, as we've mentioned, the results need to start coming this year with this offensive core. But that defense, they've got to be the anchor as they've been for the better part of this last half decade or so. They're going to need to hold the fort down. They're supposed to be, I tried to think of a somewhat sounding Tomlinism, but I can't think of one. They are supposed to be all reliable, I guess. They're going to get a turnover or so a game, as I mentioned last week. They're going to be able to get big stops when it matters and keep games within striking distance. Maybe even make games a little boring with how low scoring they are sometimes. But this defense is supposed to go out there and give the offense a chance to make a couple mistakes and still be in the game. Are they going to be able to do that this year? Because it just seems like it's kind of boiling, and you don't want to be negative. But again, Pittsburgh people, we're always trying to find something a little negative. What if the defense doesn't hit their marks and the offense does get better? How's this defense play? Because I feel like a lot of people aren't really talking about them.
I mean, you kind of have to look at how this Steelers defense performed back in like 2015, 2016, where it was solely reliant on the offense. It was reliant on Brown, Ben, and Bell. Those were the three guys that you relied on the offensive side. They were the guys that pulled the weight. That Steelers secondary was terrible back in that time frame. So now you've got a veteran core on the defensive side. I think you're more set up to have a stable defense. They might not have that same firepower that they had back in 2019, 2020, when that defense carried the weight of this team. You might not have that, but you have the pieces, you have that veteran leadership on that defensive side of the ball to where they know how this defense is supposed to be run. They have the guys that can make the plays on the defensive side of the ball. They have veteran leadership in TJ Watt, Micah Fitzpatrick, Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi. You have those guys that can pull the weight, and then you sprinkle in those young guys as well. I think you have the makings of a pretty solid defensive core to where they can, if they don't have that turnover a game, the offense can be there to help pull the weight. Because last year, even in that opening week game, the defense was all over the Bengals. It was a defensive game throughout, and it came down to that last play. It came down to special teams. I think you're going to see more of the offense starting to take over, but you have more of a balance than you've seen in years past. You have more of a balance than an offensive-centric team. You have more balance than a defensive-centric team. When Ben Roethlisberger got injured in the 2019 season, you have more cohesion. You have more balance within both sides of the ball, which I think makes this team very special because you have a mix on the defensive side of young talent as well as veteran presence, which will make this defense, you would think, flourish moving forward. And I think that's what makes this defense so special, is that you have guys that can pull the weight, that have been here before, that know how this defense is run, but you also have that young flair that can really make plays and be a valuable asset for this team moving forward.
And I think, Ethan, like you said, this defense could be really good and could really pair up well with this offense, and that's why I think there's a lot of high expectations going into this year, because you sort of know a little bit what you have with the defense, with some of those key players like Watt, Minka, Hayward, and to pair that with the offense, who's expected to be better this year. But I think the one concern defensively is, how much are they going to try to be playmakers? Are they going to go a little bit over the edge and try to look for those interceptions? Because you remember the games against the Bills last year and the Eagles where they got torched defensively in the secondary. You hope that's not the case this year, where they try to be the playmakers and cause turnovers, because now at this point, that's your offense. You don't have to worry about making having takeaways and being the reason why your team's winning. Now they can sit back and play defense like they're supposed to and just make sure you're making stops and turning the ball over on downs. So you don't have to worry about the big interceptions like Minka, the pick sixes or anything like that. Now the takeaways would be nice, but you don't have to worry about that as much defensively now. You just need to be able to play sound defense, and I think that's what they're going to look for and why this team could be pretty good this year, because the offense is expected to take that next step.
Do your job and get it done. You just have to play. You just have to play at least remotely competent, and that offense will hopefully make the plays and make enough plays to where you can get points on the board to help cushion, what you have going for you. So, yeah, like Nate said, just, play good defense. Don't look for that big play defensively where you might have needed it in years past. Just continue to push forward and play good defense, and that offense, with the weapons that they have now at their disposal, you can use that to help push this team forward and push, the score up. From when years past, you needed that defense to make the plays down the stretch.
And the other thing, think about it, that defense shouldn't be on the field as much as they have been in the past 2-3 years. I mean, they should be rested for the most part. Those veteran players like Hayward and Pat Peterson, they'll get the rest that they need and be able to go out there and make the plays, depending on if the offense lives up to that expectation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Some very good points throughout that conversation there, but I think being off the field for more than 30 seconds at a time, watching run, screen pass, 3 and out, I think that might be welcomed by this defensive core, especially some of the older NFL vets we got on the Steelers defense. But fellas, it's that time. The time when we can be as right or as wrong as we'd like to be, and there really aren't any repercussions. It's time for a final score prediction. We'll start with the late arriver himself, Mr. Nate Breisinger.
It's been a toss-up, but I'm going to go with our guns, what we've been talking about. The Steelers are going to start off pretty good. I think they're going to barely edge out the 49ers 27-21. I think, it's a touchdown game, and I think you could potentially see a late Pickett drive to win the game like you saw last year a couple times down the stretch. But I think, like we said, the balance is going to be there, and I think they're going to have enough to get it done over the 49ers and a very good 49ers team as well.
I think it's going to be a very tight game as well. I think that the balance is going to be crucial for the Steelers. I think they're going to edge out the 49ers 24-17. I think it's going to be a close game throughout, and it's going to be relying upon this Steelers offense. Will they be able to make the plays? I think this 49ers offense is very strong as well, and that 49ers defense is also a big part of this team. So it's going to be tough on both sides of the ball, but I think the Steelers are going to be able to edge us out just with the power that they have on both sides of the ball.
You're going to make me be that guy, aren't you, too? That's very nice of you. I think this is going to be a game that is very competitive, as you two both alluded to. I'm not going to make this sound very epic or anything. I think the 49ers win this one, but I think it's a very constructive kind of loss, if that makes sense. I think this is going to be a game where it's like, damn, they had a chance to win it, and they just didn't do it. And come week 10 or 11, when the games start mattering a little more, like, damn it, if only we did X against the 49ers and were able to walk away with that one. But I think it's a tight loss, but I think it's a loss that gives people a lot of confidence moving forward the rest of the season. But I got the 49ers winning this one 27-23. Head nods from the gallery. Nate, very quickly, I know you guys want to watch NFL Week 1 action. Lions and Chiefs, which is underway now officially. Nate, Cincinnati and Pitt play this weekend. Haven't heard much about this one other than the fact that they're no longer giving out that giant trophy that's, I don't remember the word for it, but it's made a lot of people mad. In 2 minutes or so, give us a little overview of what you see happening in the first game at Acrisure Stadium this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know. Cincinnati is a little bit of an unknown for Pitt because it's been quite a while since these two have met. The one familiarity for Pitt, though, is Scott Satterfield, the head coach for Cincinnati in his first year, coming over from Louisville. So Pitt lost to Louisville last year. So you'd expect Satterfield to have this similar, game plan coming into Pitt. But for the Bearcats, I mean, they really showed off last week. I mean, Emory Jones, the Florida transfer at quarterback, had 5 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, it's going to be tough for Pitt to handle him. I mean, they've done well recently against dual threat quarterbacks, but there's a chance that he may really go off against Pitt as well. I mean, defensively, we saw some good things from the Panthers, but in Week 1 against Wofford. But I think this is a real good test. It's a Big 12 team now for Cincinnati, and Pitt's usually playing Power 5 teams by Week 2, so it's a good test. And usually, for me personally, I feel like Week 2 is always a good indicator of how Pitt turns out the rest of the year. 2 years ago, they beat Tennessee in Tennessee. They went on to win the ACC championship. Last year, they lost to Tennessee in Week 2, and they went on to a 9-4 record. So I think this is a really good implication game for Pitt to see where they're headed this year. And I think Jurkovic and the offense, they left a little bit out there on the field that, they could have put up more points against Wofford, but they put in their backups, coming down to the end of the game. So I think it's a big test for Pitt in terms of what this team really is. I mean, right now it's a toss-up. It's like Steelers and 49ers. I mean, you don't know how it's going to go. Pitt's favored by a touchdown. So that's the only indication going into this game right now. So Pitt, I mean, you'd think they'd have the edge on this one, but I think it could be a 3-point game, real close.
All right, Nate Breisinger, who will be there? If you see him, say hi, snap a picture with him, send it to us on social media. Maybe later this season I'll be there with him, but unfortunately not this weekend. I got to build some kitchen chairs. Anyway, stranded in Pittsburgh. We hope everyone enjoys Week 1 of NFL action. And also, while we're here, we're going to announce it, the return of Head to Head, our trivia show. I think both of these guys are going to be in it. I never got a yes from Nate, but he's a team player. And if Ethan said yes, obviously Nate's going to say yes. We have 7 of our 8 roster spots filled right now. Head-to-head trivia show. Keep an eye out for that one. You're really going to be disappointed or really proud in our sports knowledge when you watch that one. But for now, enjoy Week 1 of NFL action. Enjoy this show. Come back, listen to it. Tell your friends to listen to it. Listen to it while you bathe, listen to it while you cook, listen to it while you sleep. I don't really care. Thanks for checking us out. We'll see you next time here on Stranded in Pittsburgh.